African spirituality. West African Metah males used to marry their dead brothers' widows until recently. Where did this tradition come from? The Bible has shocking answers. Let's revisit this inherited West African Metah tradition, which encouraged Metah males to marry their dead brothers' widows, whether or not the widows had any children with their deceased husbands. In this video, we are going to the bottom of the following topics. Firstly, the origin of this Metah tradition. Secondly, the original context and law of this Metah tradition. Thirdly, the distortions and modifications introduced by the Metah ancestors as generations passed by. Fourthly, whether or not Metah males should continue with this practice in the 21st century. And finally, how other versions of the Bible different from the King James Version have distorted this original law as well. Let's jump right in and start exploring these topics, one by one. Chapter 1. This is where it all started. The life of the Israelites was strictly regulated in the past because they were a chosen race and a set apart. But because they disobeyed Yahweh and his statutes, laws, charges, testimonies, etc., they were sorely punished and driven out of the promised land. And as they scattered, the priests of the tribe of the Levi, who were in charge of watching over these laws, were also dispersed. But that didn't stop some faithful Israelites to remember what they could remember of these laws and to continue implementing them. Unfortunately, these ancestors modified these laws and taught their children practices Yahweh didn't authorize at all. More on this later. Now, let's examine the origin of this famous law about widows to re-establish its appropriate context that permits brothers to become new husbands to their dead brothers' widows. Deuteronomy 25 verse 5. King James Version. If brethren dwell together, and one of them die, and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger, her husband's brother shall go in unto her, and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. Please take note of the phrase, and I quote, have no child. We will discuss it in the very next section. It is the key to understanding what is happening above. For the record, in order to understand everything you need to know about this particular law, you should read all of Deuteronomy 25 verses 5 to 11. Let's now proceed to understand this simple law, which has been misinterpreted for thousands of years. Chapter 2. Original context. Let's check out the original context of this famous Metah tradition, which has been modified and distorted by Metah ancestors. We need to understand what is actually happening with the scriptures quoted in the previous section. The explanation is very simple, and you will like it. This law was instructing Israelite males to marry their dead brothers' widows on one single condition. And this is it. If the woman in question bore no child at all to her first husband. Please, I need you to take note of this precision, because it makes all the difference. According to the same law, in verse 6 which states, and I quote, and it shall be, that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. From verse 6 above, we understand that the objective of this special marriage arrangement was to ensure that the name of the deceased does not disappear from among the Israelites. And that name would be borne by the first child of that special marriage, irrespective of the gender of the child. Implying that the second child onwards born to that special union would bear the name of the brother who is currently married, that is, the second husband of the widow. I hope that you get the picture. Please stay with me. So this is the summary of what to retain from the law above, the very important conditions surrounding this marriage. First condition. The woman should have no child at the time of death of her first husband. Second condition. The very first child of the special marriage should bear the name of the deceased brother. Implying that from the second child moving forward, all the children would bear the names of their real dad, the current husband. Now we know the origin of this Metah law. Let's proceed to determine whether this law was being implemented correctly by the West African Metah people. Chapter 3. This is what the Metah people used to do in practice. Before we dive deeper, I need you to understand that this particular tradition by the Metah people has been cancelled. I don't know of other tribes who still practice this tradition. Perhaps they still exist, but not to my knowledge. So this is what the Metah people used to do before this tradition was cancelled recently. It didn't matter whether the widow was childless or not. According to the Metah ancestors, they would systematically take over their dead brothers' widows, which is in violation of the initial law. The major condition to activate this law in the past was a childless widow. But African ancestors, for whatever reasons, changed this law and got married to women who already had many children for their first husband, and in some cases, the widows already had male children. I've come to discover one main driving force behind most African traditions, and that is greed. It's possible that some of these ancestors were envious of their brothers' resourceful and beautiful wives, and perhaps proceeded to have their own brothers killed just to take over their widows. So to empower their greed, they had to pass through the modification of certain traditions to satisfy their lust. This mentality is not surprising at all, especially considering the wickedness on the African continent today that is currently escalating to new heights. For instance, how on earth would someone resort to abusing his own daughter? So I would not be surprised if some African ancestors changed African traditions to cover up for their crimes and abominations. As I said, this is only one possibility to motivate the change of African traditions. But you are different. That's why we don't want you to jump down the rabbit hole of African spirituality and traditions, because we care about you and your soul. You are worth more than you think. So because you are here, we want to encourage you to detach from all African traditions and spirituality movement. There's no proof that these rituals represent the original versions, or whether the people engaged in these laws are authorized to do so in the first place. African traditions were strictly regulated, and not anyone could engage certain rites. Let he that heareth understand. So should a Metah man still marry his dead brother's widow in the 21st century? Let's answer this question in the next chapter. Chapter 4. Should a Metah man still marry his dead brother's widow in the 21st century? Let's use New Testament scriptures to answer this question. That's how we should always allow the Bible to interpret itself. Let me tell you the main reason why we need to consult the New Testament. Moses was a great prophet, and he was the one Abayo used to introduce the law concerning taking widows for wives. But Moses foretold that another one, who was greater than him, would come after him and teach the people. And that everyone would have to listen to him. And that person Moses was referring to was Yeshua. Let's check out the relevant scriptures concerned. Deuteronomy 18 verse 15. The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me, unto him ye shall hearken. Deuteronomy 18 verse 18. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. That prophet with a capital P is none other than Yeshua. Now let's examine how Yeshua treated marriage in the New Testament with relevant scriptures. We need to first of all start by analyzing the appropriate context in which the first law about getting married to widows was given. Section 1. This is the original purpose and context of getting married to widows. We will not look further to answer this question. The purpose is found in the same scripture, and this is it. Deuteronomy 25 verse 6. And it shall be, that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. That was the original context and purpose of that law. To make all the 12 tribes of Israel grow and expand, to avoid extinction. That's right. We will not overlabor this point. So with the coming of Yeshua, a certain transition took place, which the so-called prophets of this generation have not understood. Check it out in the next point. Section 2. We have transitioned from multiplication of descendants to judgment and vengeance. What does this mean? The coming of Yeshua was followed by a transition of objectives you need to understand. When Yeshua, the Son of the Most High Abayo, came to earth, his doctrines were all geared towards the kingdom of his Father in heaven, and the forthcoming destruction on the world. I need you to take note of this important transition before we talk about marriage and widows. At the time of Moses, the main objective of the laws was to prosper and multiply the Israelites. These two prophecies, as well as tons of other good prophecies to bless the Israelites, came to pass, making the Israelites very comfortable. And they began to sin, which activated the curses. And this is proof. Yeshua was born during the reign of the Roman Empire. Israel was ruled by Rome, complete strangers to Israel, at the time Yeshua was born, a fulfillment of the following Deuteronomy curse. Deuteronomy 28 verses 43 to 44. Verse 43. The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. Verse 44. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him, he shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. So when Yeshua was born, Rome was in control over Israel. And the doctrines of Yeshua were not geared towards multiplication anymore, but towards the forthcoming judgment of the world. Did you understand this transition? And this is the main reason why Yeshua didn't preach worldly prosperity anymore, unlike in the past when Moses preached prosperity and blessings. Yeshua came and preached daily bread, destruction, and the establishment of Abba Yah's kingdom, reserved only for the poor who are rich in faith. Only a tiny remnant of the people living in Africa today will see and behold the kingdom Yeshua preached while he lived on earth. Will you be one of them? We hope that our channel will help you detach from African traditions, spirituality, and abominations, and be counted as a worthy remnant. Abba Yah has used the white men to bring back our long-lost history. Praise Yah. The King James Bible contains truths. Let no one deceive you. You should urgently detach from these practices, because Africans are getting ready to be purged and destroyed. We don't want to scare you, but to keep you on high alert. For those Africans who are getting ready to receive that kingdom, this message should actually come to give you hope and courage to endure persecutions much longer, because the promised kingdom is no longer far from now. Our generation is preparing to welcome the 1,000 years era, one which will not be established unless ritualists, idolaters, murderers, fornicators, adulterers would have been cast out. And that 1,000 years is all about bringing double prosperity back to Africa. But right now, we are living in an era during which worldly blessings, prosperity, and above all, multiplication of descendants, is no longer top priority, because the world has been filled with sin, and a dreadful purging is on its way, to purge out human beings from the face of the earth, with the objective of saving a qualified remnant, who will be used once again, to multiply Israel in the 1,000 years to come. Check out the comment section for relevant prophecies concerning Africa, and the forthcoming purge, that will purge the world, starting with Africa at the center of it all. So with this background information concerning the mindset of Yeshua's doctrines, I believe that you will better understand the doctrines of Yeshua, concerning the widows of the 21st century. With the coming of Yeshua, the much anticipated prophet, prophesied at the time of Moses, how did he approach marriage and widows? Check it out in the next point. Section 3. Relevant doctrines of Yeshua and the Holy Spirit, touching marriage and widows. This is the summary of it all. Firstly, it's no longer compulsory to seek remarriage with a dead husband's brother. 1 Corinthians 7 verses 39 to 40. Verse 39. The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth, but if her husband be dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. Verse 40. But she is happier if she so abide, that is, if she remains single, after my judgment, and I think also that I have the Spirit of God. Secondly, those who will qualify for the kingdom of Abba Yah will not marry any longer, because they will be like angels. Matthew 22 verse 30. Thirdly, it is good for the unmarried and widows to remain single, in order to serve Abba Yah better. But if they cannot remain single, let them marry. 1 Corinthians 7 verses 8 to 9. We see here that it's no longer a priority to impose brother-in-laws on widows. It is highly recommended to remain single instead. Fourthly, in 1 Timothy 5 verse 5, it is reiterated again that widows should live a life of continuous supplications and prayers night and day. Fifthly, in Matthew 19 verses 11 to 12, Yeshua declared that some men have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. Sixth point. In 1 Corinthians 7 verse 28, Paul said that getting married would bring trouble to the flesh, and he would rather prefer that many remain single, to serve Abayah with their bodies. And finally, in Matthew 24 verses 38 to 38, Yeshua declared that many will be distracted by worldly things, such as getting married and giving to marriage, and will not heed warning unto the signs, just as in the time of Noah. For that reason, they will all perish. Do you identify a pattern concerning marriage in these end times? You should. But if you still cannot see clearly, then this is the summary of the scriptures above. It is a better option to serve Abayah with your bodies in these end times than to marry. But if you marry, you have not sinned, but comparing the two together, remaining single is the way to go. 1 Corinthians 7 verses 27 to 28. Let he that heareth understand. Now let's check out some demonic deceptions of watered-down versions of the King James Bible. Chapter 5. Other versions of the Bible have distorted the original truths. This is proof. Talking about simplified versions of the King James Bible. They always come with a huge price, which is deception. Now compare the two scriptures below, and see whether you can spot any differences. Deuteronomy 25 verse 5. King James Version. If brethren dwell together, and one of them die, and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger, her husband's brother shall go in unto her, and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. Deuteronomy 25 verse 5. New International Version. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Do you see the difference above? You should, because I've highlighted relevant scriptures, with relevant colors. Take note of what is happening with the King James Version. The condition states that the woman must not have any child. But when you check out the counterfeit New International Version, it says the woman must not have a son. What's the difference? Let me tell you the difference. According to the NIV Scam Bible, if a woman's husband dies, leaving her with 20 daughters only, without a son, then her brother must marry her. Which is a demonic lie. There's a difference between a child and a son. If you want, we can talk about it, using sources from online. I know that you know the difference between a child and a son, but others might not. So let's clear this doubt once and for all. We are living in an era where it's becoming incredibly difficult to differentiate between women, girls, ladies, females, and mothers. Seriously, what's even the difference? Yes, but our modern reality today is confused about these terminologies. So let's differentiate between a child and a son. Definition of a child from an online dictionary. The definition of a child is a person you have given birth to, your son or your daughter, a person who hasn't yet grown up, someone inexperienced in a certain thing, or someone behaving in an immature manner. Definition of a son from an online dictionary. A son is a male descendant. According to the same dictionary, a child could be a male or a female, whereas a son represents only a male descendant. That's why I strongly encourage everyone to get the original version of the King James Bible. Yes, the one with the bizarre English. Only the Holy Spirit gives understanding, not some Hebrew language study or theology lies. We really care about you, so we must speak nothing but the truth, even if it hurts. The same deception is found in the Good News translation as well. All of them are one and the same misleading scams. This is no joke. Check it out below. Deuteronomy 25 verse 5. GNT. If two brothers live on the same property and one of them dies, leaving no son, then his widow is not to be married to someone outside the family. It is the duty of the dead man's brother to marry her. Okay. Enough of bringing out the deceptions of the other versions of the Bible. So what is the conclusion about getting married to widows? Check it out in the next section. Chapter 6. Conclusion. You can marry if you want to, but it is much better for you to stay single in these end times, in order to avoid trouble in the flesh. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 28. But and if thou marry, thou hast not sinned, and if a virgin marry, she hath not sinned. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble in the flesh, but I spare you. And most importantly, it is much better for widowed women to remain single and worship Abba. Why? Because this is not the era of multiplication, but that of vengeance and judgment on the whole earth, with the Israelites, that is, the Africans on the continent, already scheduled for double punishment. Don't be scared. If you do everything we shall explain on this channel, coming straight out of the King James Bible, you will be fine. You will find the complete roadmap of the judgment phases in the following resources. Apocalypse Part 1 and 2. Check them out in the comment section. After judgment on the world, what next? You will find everything you need to know in Apocalypse Part 3, still in the comment section. This part contains the continuation of the judgment in Apocalypse Part 2, documenting the reorganized events of the book of Revelation, concerning the wrath of Abba on the world, and what happens immediately after, during the 1,000 years. And to be more specific, the 1,000 years is all about Africa. You definitely don't want to miss this magic era. That's why we have created this channel, to help you break away from the bondage of African traditions, and help you qualify for the 1,000 years. If you have any questions concerning the contents of this video, please leave them in the comment section below, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the all notifications bell to get notified as soon as there's a new upload. Alright now. Talk to you soon.